Before we get started, we respectfully acknowledge that we are situated on the traditional territories and treaty lands, in particular those of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, as well as the Anishinaabe of the Williams Treaty First Nation, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis Nation. As RESCON's office is located in Vaughan, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. A few housekeeping items. We will be sharing the recording link, as Andrew just said, in our post-event summary. So anyone who did RSVP via Eventbrite and all RESCON members will receive the webinar recording in a couple of days. And then we will also be having a panel discussion where you can use the Q&A function on Zoom to ask any questions to the panelists. I believe Dr. Moody will also be taking a couple of questions if anyone from the audience has them as well. And on that note, I think we all know why we're here today. If you don't, on June 1st of this year, Naloxone kits will be required in certain workplaces. And as most of us know as well, Naloxone kits are in conjunction with proactive mental health awareness and related training, as well as removing the stigma around mental health and addictions, are just a few tools that are being employed in the construction industry to mitigate drug use and related mental health challenges that workers may face. At RESCON, we believe mental health is health, and that mental health and addiction should be treated as health and safety issues. And today we'll hear from experts in the industry that are leading the charge on addressing mental health and addictions in construction. Our first speaker is Chief Prevention Officer for the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development, Dr. Joel Moody. He joins the ministry from the Electrical Safety Authority, where he worked on public health and occupational health, as well as mental health and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think I'll leave it there because most of us are familiar with Dr. Moody, and I'll let him speak for himself. So thank you for joining us.
Well, Amina, thank you so much for having me, and of course, Andrew and the rest of the RESCON family. So happy that you've offered me this opportunity to come and speak to our audience today about a very, very important topic, and especially as it relates to the opportunity to save lives. Because at the end of the day, the naloxone is that way in which, if someone is experiencing an overdose, either from substance misuse issues or some other concerns, this is the way that we save lives. So happy to be here and happy to speak with you. I think there's a slide deck that I provided earlier, and I would like to use that to kind of go through my talk with you all. All right, so
is it up?
Next, I can see it. Next slide, please. All right. So just some background information to kind of set the stage. And these data are a little older, but just by a year. When we talk about opioids in Ontario, the opioid issue that is in Ontario is not unique to Ontario in itself. Opioid misuse is a public health crisis, and it has many different facets of why it's here. Anywhere from the prescription of opioids that are used to manage an individual's pain, because that is exactly what they're designed to be used for, is to manage pain. Sometimes those medications are received in an illicit, i.e. street standpoint, and we don't know what's in those drugs, and they're contaminated. A lot of times it's fentanyl. And now it's getting into different derivatives of fentanyl. People are having substance misuse issues because of great mental health concerns. Isolation, we've seen increases because humans are not creatures that are meant to be in isolation. We're social creatures, we're social animals. And so that ability of not having that interaction creates stress. And individuals find ways to deal with that stress in many different ways. And substance misuse could be one of those. But it goes back to the ultimate talk when we talk about the numbers of people that have died, unfortunately. When we look at the statistics in 2022, about 2,400 people died from opioid-related causes. And about 73% of those, no one was there in order to intervene, meaning they were using a substance by themselves and they had an overdose and died. In about 2021, those numbers had increased, unfortunately, and about 57% of those were related to opioids as well. What are some of the factors? Well, we know that individuals that are related to lack of housing is some incarceration. Individuals in the BIPOC community do have increased risk, but it is not only those groups. When we look at what's happening from the standpoint of an occupational setting, okay, those individuals do have homes. Those individuals have jobs. And if we look at those 2,500 roughly deaths that happened in 2020, about 13% of those were among employed individuals, right? So once again, that misnotion of substance misuse being used from a lack of housing, that's not as accurate. And of the 13% of those that died, 30% of those were employed in the construction sector. So we know that, once again, it is highly related and associated with costing, with jobs and things of that nature. So what are we doing in ways in order to try to minimize, once again, preventable deaths? And an opioid poisoning is a preventable death. If you have access to the medication, in this case, naloxone, and the ability to get them to appropriate care shortly. So that's the picture that's being painted. Next slide, please. So in 2022 in April, the government amended the Occupational Health and Safety Act such that employers who now become aware or ought reasonably to be aware that there is a risk of an opiate overdose, they have to take some action. And what are those actions? Well, two things. Ensuring that naloxone, and in our case, nasal naloxone, is present at the workplace, as well as ensuring that you have proper training of the individuals to administer. So wanting to have part of that training, minimizing the stigma associated with substance misuse, mental health aspects related to substance misuse issues, but as well how to administer it properly such that at the end of the day, you are preventing that death. So Ontario Regulation 5592, 55922 creates what it is in prescribing. And as mentioned, it comes into effect June 1st of 2023. So just right around the corner, employers who ought to have known. And the question is always, what does ought to have known mean? Well, on ontario.ca/naloxone, you will see the 3 criteria that exist. And once again, use that as your guide to help you. And of course, always work with your teams and groups and with your legal to understand your obligations. But this is a uniqueness that exists. So the reg, how it's used, how it's stored, how it's maintained, and as well as who's in charge. So important, because with any type of situations where you would be using a first aid type approach, have your plan. And this is a very important piece. Next slide. So government has created an opportunity, and we do call it a first of its kind program because it is. So in December, the minister was very clear that, one death is a death too many. And so the opportunity to get kids into the workplaces is so important. And so in order to help employers, transition and navigate to help them with compliance, the government created and launched the first of its kind program to provide the kits and training to the workplaces. It's in effect for up to 2 years, where we, the government, will be covering those costs for you, ensuring that you have access to the kits, ensuring that you're also training for those that need it based upon the requirements of the regulation. And what we're doing is we're using the nasal naloxone. Once again, through some of the research, it was found that this was an easier method to provide the medication, but it's still, from this perspective, wanting to make sure it gets out into the public. Because once again, if someone is having an overdose, this is an alternative for death. It's so important. So next slide. So what is the program? How is it being delivered? Well, currently we have two major partners that are helping us, St. John Ambulance, as well as the Canadian Red Cross. And depending upon what works best for your employer, what works best for your staff, two different mechanisms and modalities of delivering the training. So once again, with St. John's, instructor-led, live, identifying those outcomes, Canadian Red Cross, self-paced e-learning modules. So once again, depending upon what you want, in order that best suits the employer as well as those that are being trained in order to provide this life-saving service. But at the end of the day, the curriculum is exactly the same around the key concepts, understanding about the opioid issues that are in Canada, harm reduction, reducing stigma, how to introduce naloxone, assessing your situation, CPR, and as well as how to respond to that emergency situation to call 911. So part of what that the established curriculum is about in order to ensure that we're making sure that people who need to have access have it, and as well as it can be used appropriately. So we've had great success so far. So as of April, we've had over 800 workplaces who have requested kits. Of course, we've done far more training than that. A lot of those, once again, the construction manufacturers, from what the data are telling us, are taking us up on it. But location-wise, still focused mostly in Central Ontario, but it is a provincial program. So please don't assume that it's just Central Ontario specific. It is provincial wide. And this is a fact and statistic that I was very happy to see, is that the ability to increase awareness. When we talk about any training or educational program, increasing awareness is always one of those things that we are seeking to improve. And about 86% of those that have gone through these programs have said that they are more aware of opioid and the related harms. So how does this maybe translate not only within the workplace, but maybe into private and recreational life? Once again, work and private life are so intertwined now. Some of us are working from home. Some of us are actually, doing both, hybrid, all those great things. So the lines are becoming more and more blurred and intertwined. Access is, once again, the most important thing in recognizing how do we find ways to prevent this death, which is preventable. So provided some additional items, next slide, just as an appendix, in case you wanted to just look at some additional things. But because at the end of the day, there are other programs that do exist, not only from a workplace standpoint, which is what we at the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development is responsible for, but our colleagues with the Ministry of Health. So you see that there's the Ontario Naloxone program, Ontario Naloxone program for pharmacies, and I see that we will have another, one of our guests who is a pharmacist, potentially can talk a little bit about that more for us. And then as well as some work that's being done with the Ministry of the Solicitor General. And these are for, once again, provincial correctional facilities partners. So recognizing it's not just a one sector, not just a one industry, not just a one occupational aspect, but how do we create the opportunity as a province to find ways to deal with this public health crisis. So I thank you so much for your time, and happy if there are some questions. Amina, if we have time, happy to answer a few.
Not seeing any questions come through in the chat or the Q&A, but maybe if there are any that start to trickle in during Mark or the panel discussion, you can circulate goes back to you as well if they're directed at you, unless any of the other speakers had questions for Dr. Moody.
Right, I did get one texted to me, and so the question was, if we've registered people, so if we have naloxone on site June 1st, and we've registered people for training, what will the response be from the Ministry of Labor? I know that's an enforcement question, not a prevention question, but just wanted to pass the question along.
Yeah, no, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, definitely. Our inspectors will always, evaluate the situation as needed, and of course, if there's the ability to demonstrate that, yep, it's in the process. I don't want to speak for the inspectors, but those are the types of things that employees, employers are making the difference, and then those are the things that are very, very important as we talk about compliance and enforcement. But definitely want to make sure that if you do have those questions, please contact the Fair Health Safety Workplace Division, and they can give you the exact answer.
Great. Okay, so I think we'll move on to our next speaker. Thank you, Dr. Moody, for speaking to our group today. Actually, I think there might be one. Okay, sorry. Is there a cost associated with the training?
No, thanks for the question. So under the program that we are providing, we are covering all costs. So the cost of training, as well as the cost of a kit and training for up to 2 members. So we are covering that cost.
And is it time, like, is the training time limited? Like a year from now that training will be offered, or yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Amina. So yeah, so just to maybe restate. So the current interim program that we're using to help employers and their staff come into compliance is a 2-year limited time, such that within this 2-year frame, we are covering the cost of kit at each workplace, as well as the training for up to 2 workers on each work site. Of course, if an employer wishes to train more, by all means, we do not say no, but those costs would not be covered by this program.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Thank you for chatting with us today. I'm sure you'll have a lot more questions between now and June 1st, and we'll continue to see you after June 1st. So thank you again for chatting with us today. Our next speaker is Mark Barnes, who is a pharmacist and is the owner of Respect RX Pharmacies. Mark and his partner at the pharmacy are passionate advocates for the respectful approach to substance misuse and mental health treatment. This led them to develop Respect RX, a chain of pharmacies that pride themselves on providing dignified, stigma-free pharmacy services to those with complex mental health and addictions issues. Further to this, Mark's work on the opioid crisis led him to develop and implement a fentanyl patch return program to help curb the diversion of this deadly drug to the streets. In 2015, this fentanyl patch for patch return program became Ontario law. Mark has received many awards over the years, including Alumni of the Year from Memorial University in Newfoundland and Disease Management Award from the National Commitment to Care Award, among many more. Welcome, Mark, and thank you for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me. And before I go forward, I do some national work as well with overdose prevention. And when I'm out and about outside of Ontario, I tell you, it's a pleasure to come back home. Our Minister of Health, and actually now our Minister of Labor, has really put the work and time in to listen to Ontario residents about the opioid crisis. And I can tell you right now that despite my I think is now a little bit silly, the Bill C-33 Safeguarding the Community Act, this bill, the Working for Workers Act, the implementation of naloxone and training in workplaces will be probably the biggest thing we've ever done to fight the opiates crisis in Ontario. I'm already starting to see the difference from my own perspective from the street level. It is making a difference. It's breaking down a lot of the stigma. And I can't thank, Dr. Joel Moody and the work that the office has done to help this in Ontario. As a frontline healthcare professional and a passionate advocate for what we do, this has been an absolute blessing to be a part of. And I think it's going to make a difference. If anything, you guys will be industry leaders across Canada. They've already had discussions with partners like St. John Ambulance and Mom Stop the Harm about maybe even approaching other legislatures outside of Ontario to do the same work. So thank you very much, first of all, for everything you guys have done. It's been an amazing to be a part of. So that's important to note. And I know sometimes we get wrapped up in what we're not doing correctly, but this is one thing that we've got right. So thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. The second thing, I know you guys think this is another occupational health and safety standard we have to do. That's just another thing to pile on a busy work day. This will make a difference in the lives of your workers. You know, we have a 300,000 skilled workforce shortage in Ontario. We got to start taking care of our guys at work, make sure they come back to work happy and healthy the next day. This will have a big part in doing that, especially those who are battling complex mental health and substance issues. My own personal experiences come from an overdose as well. During my time as a community pharmacist, you know, we then open our centers dedicated to complex mental health and substance issues. We recognized 10 years ago that this industry, especially manufacturing, construction, had a high prevalence of people battling with substance misuse. We recognized it. We had to open our pharmacies extremely early, at 6 a.m. We had to open late. And, since October 1st, 2013, we have not closed one day. Why? To support people who work long hours in our province. We're there for them because nobody works longer than people in construction, let's face it. So, we recognized this problem a long time ago. The second thing we also recognize that, still holds true today, unfortunately, is that the biggest thing missing from dealing with people with complex mental health and substance misuse is respect, respect for the person, the trauma, the life they've been through that's kind of led to the substance misuse in the first place. The general population really doesn't truly understand it. That's why we name our place respect. It's kind of more of our mission statement, not just our name. So it's quite important that we keep that in the back of our mind that, post-COVID, as our healthcare system is overwhelmed, as we deal with delayed ER calls, as we deal with many different situations in our society, this tool we're going to talk about, Naloxone, how we use it, why it's important, is more important now than it's ever been. Most people die of an opiate overdose in Ontario. Actually, 911's been called. Paramedics are en route, but they didn't have a tangible tool to keep them breathing until paramedics got there. And that's the truth, right? We know from the data that 73% of people were kind of alone. And, this being alone in the darkness by themselves has got to stop, and the conversation has to change. And that's important. So with that and that little intro, I'm going to kind of share my slides, guys, to get going here, if that's okay. Well, I am disabled still. Is it possible, or will you guys present my slides for me? Or
No, we should be able to figure
no problem. Excellent. Thank you. So the task at hand today is to talk about opioids, right? And of all the substances out there in our society, why do we talk about opioids so much, right? Like, why do they seem to be front and center everywhere as we deal with this opioid epidemic? And the answer is quite simple.
You should be good now.
Okay. Sorry. It's because this is what kills us, right? And that's the truth, right? So this is what kills us. Opioids is what's going to take you out probably faster than any other substance. So we talk about opioids all the time. Now I'm going to take off my substance misuse hat. I'm going to put on my pharmacist hat for a second and tell you that opioids are not bad medications. They're not. And we actually cannot do modern medicine without opioids. And that's important to note. And they're probably never going away completely, despite all the litigation against Purdue Pharma, despite all the things that we talk about, the deprescribing by physicians, and you can't get pain management anymore, or walk-in clinics, and you almost got to plead your case to get treated nowadays. They're never going away because we can't do modern medicine without them, right? But they should be reserved for advanced acute pain, such as cancer, such as cutting your foot off with a saw. Those things hurt. We are human. We're allowed to take pain management. It's okay. It's okay. The second reason why we need opioids is, to put you to sleep for surgery. And those who are not health professionals, I use that as an example to teach you really what an overdose is. So there's two main sources of opioids in our communities. As mentioned earlier, there is prescription sources, and then there's the illicit street source, right? So the prescription sources, some of the names are ahead of you there: hydromorphone, morphine, codeine, OxyContin, Percocet. There's many opioids from pharmacies, from hospitals. And then there's another nasty source of opioids from our street, and that's the street source bootleg opioids, made by the street for the street. Most information in our region, which I'm in Eastern Ontario, that we do talk about, these opioids aren't imported. Most of them are kind of manufactured, packaged here locally across drug dens across this province. Okay, it's very, very common. Now, when we started doing this overdose prevention, this work in our community, the most famous, notorious street opioid that was available 10 years ago, back in 2012, 2013, was kind of heroin, right? And it's very popular, like you see in most gangster movies on TV. Advance to 2023, where we sit today in our current epidemic, and really, heroin isn't most prevalent at all. It's actually been replaced with street-sourced bootleg drug den fentanyl. different than fentanyls from hospitals, different than epidurals in childbirth and for pain management. This fentanyl is made by the street for the street. It's a powdered form fentanyl. It's various colors depending on the food coloring used, actually. Okay, that is a big problem in our society because fentanyl is about 100 times stronger than heroin per milligram strength. And really, the stuff we package now is cross-contaminated with everything. I've got some recent data in front of me from the Toronto Drug Checking Service. And, you know, the stuff is more toxic mixed with many other different sleeping pills and things like xylazine and other benzodiazepines that are leading to very complicated, complex overdoses now. So really, you know, you can't trust your drug dealer. You know, I wouldn't let them make me a sandwich, is the joke I often say, is because they cannot make a consistent form of fentanyl, right? They don't have access to proper quality assurance techniques, manufacturing facilities, labs, pharmacists, pharmacologists to make this stuff consistent. So there are hundreds of analogs of fentanyl out there. As we swing in up to overdoses now, most of the new trends are like fluorofentanyl and carfentanyl. And these things are really 2 to 10 to 100 times stronger than fentanyl. So in essence, we could be now on the street creating a fentanyl analog that could be 10,000 times stronger than heroin per milligram strength. So this leads us to a bigger problem, and maybe a problem that's more relevant to construction and manufacturing, that not only do we have an opioid crisis where more people are consuming opioids than we've ever seen in Ontario, we also have a non-opioid street drug issue as well, right? Where the minute amount of these little street drugs, these opioids, can be mixed into all other street drugs. So people in Ontario will die of an opioid overdose, and they didn't want to take an opioid in the first place. That's terrifying. Molly, ecstasy, crystal meth, crack, cocaine, speed, shrooms, you know, fake steroids at gyms, and even street source non-government supply cannabis can be, in theory, cross-contaminated with opioids. So the message from public health, the message from our providers of services in Ontario is that it doesn't matter really, you know, what you're taking from the street. You know, assume it has opioids in it, advocate for never using that substance alone, and always carry an overdose prevention kit, naloxone. We have 3 programs in Ontario. We have the ONP, we have had the ONPP, and now we have the Solicitor General's program that's been around since 2016. Okay, guys? Programs involved about getting naloxone in our communities to help prevent overdose deaths. Now, what is an overdose? Let me teach it to you simple, so you guys can teach it to your employees, co-employees, your memberships, or your families. I think of opioid overdose as going to sleep for surgery. All right, we can all relate to that. You know, it's time for your knee replacement. Count backwards from 10, 9, 8, 7. You're unconscious, right? You know, welcome to the wonderful world of opioid overdose is how I present it. Think about anesthesiology is putting you into an overdose so we can do that knee replacement pain-free, right? Now, this level of opioids, similar to what we see on the street, as we know, as soon as you lose consciousness from those opioids, physicians in the pre-op procedure, they intubate and ventilate. They hook you up to machines to keep you breathing during surgery. Why? This level of opioid in the body, similar to, like I said, the street source, can't be, you know, it doesn't just kill pain. It doesn't just sedate for surgery. It kind of acutely stops breathing. We need machines to keep you breathing. So on the street, an overdose is you stop breathing. Your brain, your body gets overwhelmed with the opioid. Your breathing's depressed. Your brain becomes hypoxic, which leads to certain brain death. That whole process to this level of opioid, from access to the opioid to death, can be as quick as 3 to 5 minutes, right? Think about that 3 to 5 minute time frame. Apply that to today's healthcare system, where we talk about delays at ERs, you know, closure of rural ER departments, level 0 paramedic service at different times. You know, this tool, naloxone, is more important than it's ever been, as I mentioned earlier, ever, as we overwhelmed healthcare system post-COVID. It really is. Then take that information of overwhelmed healthcare system, 3 to 5 minutes to die, and apply it to large-scale manufacturing and construction sites in Ontario. One point of entry at security to get into a site, rural quarries, temporary elevators built in new towers. How long does it take to get an EMS to somebody who is struggling? It's a lot longer than 3 to 5 minutes. This is why this new mandate of naloxone and overdose prevention training on high-risk job sites across Ontario is not just evidence-based, but more relevant now than it's ever been. Phenomenal. And it's starting to make a lot of sense for most people. So I won't, talk about the statistics across the country. Dr. Moody really was eloquently said how bad the problem is. But I always say this number because it's staggering. Since 2016 in Canada, we've lost well over now 43,000 people to an opioid overdose death. Really, those acute numbers are larger than COVID. 8,000 in 2021 and almost 3,000 in Ontario. And you know what? As Dr. Moody mentioned earlier, the Ontario government's not naive to this. The Minister of Health actually activated the emergency response system around this opioid crisis back in 2018. And they started for everyone free in Ontario, covering Narcan nasal spray from pharmacies, from public health. Amazing. The only provinces in Ontario to cover the nasal spray free for its residents are Ontario, Quebec, and the Northwest Territories. We are so fortunate to have that ability. I see people who use this stuff as a medicine every single day to keep them breathing until they have a chance to get well mentally. Having just the injectable available, it's not as good. This is a game changer. So back in 2018, when we recognized that, we talked about overdose prevention. We got kits out there. We started giving out nasal spray. Ontario's number was only at 1,400. Now we're double that. This is why Bill 88 is a necessity. If you look at how we went there from 2012 to 2018, this was the introduction, the switch, I guess, from heroin to fentanyl in the streets of Ontario, and the death rate skyrocketed. Then we activated the emergency response system. We started talking about Naloxone. We got it out there. We had TV advertising, bus ads, and we started giving out nasal Narcan as much as we could. And it worked. You'll see that we flattened the curve of growth. We got ahead of it a little bit. Not that we got better in Ontario, but at least we started to tread water. And then, of course, the whole world was absolutely blindsided by a global pandemic in 2020. We've seen a 62% increase immediately to 2,426 deaths, right? Fear, anxiety, isolation. And I think access to consistent cash are some of the reasons reported to me from the guys who are struggling on the street of why overdoses spiked. And now we're at 3,000. Again, Bill 88, the Working for Workers Act, mandating this training is more important now than it's ever been. And it will work again. We will flatten the curve again. I'm already starting to see it. People ask me about construction often. We talked about some of the statistics again, and a lot of it is real, right? 98% were male. The cross-contamination we speak about is a real thing. 56% involve stimulants, 1 of 5 in alcohol. And it's not just street use, 11% involve prescriptions. You have to understand that. And the real value in Bill 88, as I mentioned, is at home, after work, on payday maybe. 4 and 5 of these deaths happen in private residence, less than 2% on the job. It's an amazing experience to, an opportunity really to be able to break down some of the stigma around naloxone and realize that people who carry naloxone aren't just drug users. They're people savers. We can really change the stigma around overdose prevention and naloxone in this province and be industry leaders for the whole country. And we have an opportunity to do that here in Ontario. If people ask me about construction often as well, they're like, Mark, why construction? Why are you guys always picking on construction? Simple. 30% of the deaths of those people employed from the construction sector. Rather than me tell you why, I want to refer you to an article written in Our Times Labor magazine by Megan Kinch, called What Happens When You Tell the Truth? Construction Workers Confront the Industry's Epidemic. It really is a fantastic read. Megan isn't just a journalist. She's also an electrician. She works in the industry, and she quotes many reasons: bullying, abuse, lack of empathy for treatment, pain, opioid use for pain, as many reasons of why this industry is so overrepresented. Fantastic read. Check it out. And Megan's stories, her take on it is supported by some of the evidence. And here's some of the things that I find embarrassing that we have to move forward. Over 3/4 of the people who were battling in the construction sector, 78 had an injury or pain diagnosis in the 5 years prior to death. Okay. So it starts with pain. 3 and 5 were then diagnosed later with an opioid use disorder where they were struggling with opioids, yet only 1 in 6 seek treatment. Those numbers got to change. They have to change because we recognize that 4 and 5 were battling a mental health disorder. We got to start, really taking care of our membership a little bit differently and making sure everyone is happy and healthy heading back to work the next day. Now, we talked about the legislation. We talked about risk factor in construction, but I want to talk about 2018 when we did the work and it worked before. The best region actually getting kits out there in the province at that time was us here in Ottawa at 38.1 kits per harm, where the provincial average is only 9.6. My message isn't just to tell you that we were better than everyone. Okay, that's not what it was. Because despite our large distribution, here's the message. Despite our large distribution, we still lost 65 people. Now, I recognize that maybe it could have been more. Sure. I never focus on lives saved, though. I always focus on lives lost. It keeps my head in the game and focused on the work we have to do to get better. When we look at the data of those 65 deaths here in this region, when I detailed with our coroner's office, I said, you know, of those deaths, how often are we finding naloxone at the scene? In other words, how often, if they weren't alone, maybe, did the person have a chance to make it? And upon further investigation, they found that only 1 in 4 had naloxone. So that made us recognize the general population in Ontario really doesn't understand who's at risk of opiate poisoning. We don't know necessarily. So we need to think about everybody, right? So television, media, they certainly want you to think that the opioid crisis, as mentioned earlier, is a guy maybe with a needle in his arm, homeless, unemployed, Lower East Side of Vancouver, right? Like, and that's media propaganda. Really, it doesn't reflect the real picture in Canada, especially Ontario. You know, over 68% of people who are living in Ontario are actually housed, right? They have a home. And we know how many are working. It's upwards of about 59% at least have a part-time job. It's not an unemployment issue. It's not a homelessness issue. It's an everybody issue, right? An everybody issue. A humanitarian effort is required, okay? And many of these people we forget about were prescribed opioids. 1 in 3 people who die of an opioid overdose in Ontario in general have an active prescription for an opioid during the month of death. 1 in 3. If we go back 5 years previous, it's actually over 90%. So we know lots of times it starts from pain, legitimate pain, and opioids from prescriptions. We have to protect Ontario residents. Now, I know there's deprescribing. I understand that you cannot get opioids as well as you used to be able to, but yet we're still one of the epicenters of opioid prescribing on the planet. When you look at some of the prescribing information, you know, really 13% of Ontario adults receive an opioid prescription in 2021. That's a large number. I think we dispense over 100 million opioid prescriptions in Canada per year. No, it's almost 3 per person living. That's a large amount. We can test opioids in our wastewater. We're bathed in them. Okay. Now, since 2018, of course, I can give out this Narcan nasal spray in the event of someone that's a high risk of an acute opioid overdose. Yet only 1.6% of those prescriptions that leave pharmacy counters are protected right now. We have to do more. We really have to do more. So people prescribed opioids must be protected. Also, very important, okay, are the friends and family of those prescribed opioids as well. We know they're in the home and there's a chance for them to be given, stolen, purchased, or given to friends. We're actually trying to be nice here. We're trying to be empathetic, and we share opioids with friends and families. Greater than 70% of opioid use is for non-medical reasons. We know we have to protect the friends and family of those prescribed opioids as well. We're really seeing the sharing of opioids in our construction sector. That's why I put the 1 in 3 there in front of you. And of course, the third group are the group that are, you know, near and dear to my heart. Right there, the guys with a substance misuse issue. As I mentioned earlier, many identify as working in manufacturing and construction. We know that. We know it's a relapsing condition. It needs mega support for many years. They have to be protected. But this doesn't tell the whole story, right? You know, I have access to about 4,000 people who are battling substance misuse every single day, and they want me to bring a perspective forward to you guys too, that has to deal with a street perspective around the opiate crisis. And they talk about tolerance. They might say, Mark, based on the sheer amount of opioids that are in our society, both prescription, non-prescription, street use, whatever, we have to protect everyone. If you don't have tolerance to an opioid, you may be at risk. Now, you don't have tolerance to an opioid if you were never expecting to see one in your body, such as someone who thought they were doing cocaine or got access to a kid who got access to a tablet on the floor. You know, they have no tolerance. They will overdose. But also, you have to understand, even if you use opioids for pain periodically, you lose your tolerance in 3 days. If you have not seen an opioid in your body in 3 days, you're at risk of overdose. So this is why the Solicitor General's office is involved for people post-incarceration. This is why, you know, like a grandmother who makes a mistake with her own prescription, doesn't take them for a few days because of dementia, then takes too many on Thursday to go to bingo, will overdose. We have to protect everyone who doesn't have tolerance or loses their tolerance in a few days. Also, the guys telling me, Mark, if you're not well, you're not medically well, breathing difficulties, COPD, asthma, maybe you're a heavy smoker, maybe you have other problems like liver and kidney disorders, you're at risk of overdose because you can't really metabolize or deal with the opioid in your body. Also, using alone is a big risk factor, especially among those who want to hide it. About youth who just want to hide it from mom and dad, or maybe an employee who's hiding it from their employer, right? Using alone is a big risk factor because you have to understand Naloxone is intended to be used on somebody else, not yourself. It's a life-saving tool, right? Those who carry it should be deemed people savers, not drug users. However, in our society now, people who ask for naloxone, even in my own healthcare system, they're deemed drug users. We got to change the conversation. I really think this new bill mandating naloxone and overdose prevention will actually destigmatize those who carry naloxone as a life-saving tool now. I think we're on the right way. The conversation will change. Because using alone is a big risk factor. You cannot use it on yourself. There's no one around to help you. So important that we never, ever use alone, and we advocate for people to use substances with other people. And of course, the previous overdose is actually a risk factor for more overdoses. And the general population, especially those in manufacturing and construction, have a hard time understanding how somebody could use a substance, almost physically die, spend a couple of days in ICU battling for the life, live, thank goodness, and then actually go out and use the same substance again. They don't really kind of understand that. But this defines opioid use disorder. Remember, as I mentioned earlier, it is not a character flaw or a moral insufficiency. It's a true mental health disorder. People who are using substances often are treating their own mental health condition. They're using it to turn off the brain. Opioids, of all the substances out there, kill pain. But in over 70% of the time, they're used to kill mental pain. So if you experience, sexual assaults as a kid or abandonment, PTSD from military service, bullying, bankruptcy, worry, marriage trouble, whatever your trauma is, and you want to escape that for a few minutes, unfortunately, opioids are your best friends. The problem is where someone wants to go in their substance misuse, like where that, they feel most comfortable taking it is almost 2 breaths per minute now. They're almost physically dead. And they'll use that substance many times a day for many years until they have a chance to get well. Again, naloxone is designed to keep them breathing as a medicine until they have a chance to get well mentally. That's what it is, because they battle. And the drug they choose to use now is stronger than ever. That is a 1-inch ruler on the right-hand side of your screen. This is your toxic drug supply in fentanyl, carfentanil, or similar. Those who choose to use it cannot control what they're using. And it gets accidentally mixed in a lot of things. So the message is simple. Never use that substance alone. Always carry naloxone, and be aware, what are the signs and symptoms of opiate overdose? So there are many of them. They're in front of us right now, and I'll describe them to you guys so you'll know what happens in the event of an acute opiate overdose, okay? So simple. The first one is a decreased level of consciousness. You're prepped and ready for surgery. You're actually unconscious. You cannot be woken up, even if you pinch or shake someone. Then the pupils become pinpoint. During an opiate overdose, all you can see is the color part, very distinctive with bright blue and green eyes. Harder to tell with darker eyes. Then we see a deep snorting or gurgling sound. This is the body gasping for air without the mechanical ability to breathe. The same sound you'd make if I took my hands, placed them around your neck, and maybe even choked you out. But actually, in this situation, it gets louder and louder and louder, and there's no hands around the neck. Then the lips turn blue, fingertips turn blue, the whole face turns blue, hands blue, blue. Blue is the color described by medical literature, for sure. However, it really pertains to kind of pale skinned white people, actually. We are a multicultural society. We really are, and we have a bunch of different ethnicities in our country. This diversity defines Canada and makes us awesome. You have to recognize if you're Black, Middle Eastern descent, Indigenous, the darker the complexion of the skin, the more gray the color. So it's blue or gray. Then we see this white foam around the mouth, and then the person starts to shake. In the literature, limp body is identified as a side effect. However, now with our most toxic opioids, limp body is no longer seen. It's more of a rigidity and even a clenched jaw sometimes with a carotid artery that's pulsed. As the rapid oxygen, as oxygen's rapidly, removed from the muscle cells. And even the person starts to shake at the end because of it. This is what we're seeing, okay? This is the signs and symptoms of opiate overdose. If you think substances at all, you know it's time for naloxone. Now, what is this stuff that we're mandated to have? To me, I think of Narcan or naloxone as the EpiPen for opioids, but it's just a nasal spray in Ontario, thank goodness. As outlined by Dr. Moody, nasal sprays are what's required, and it's like the EpiPen for opioids, but it's just a nasal spray. It's a single-use device, already primed, ready to go. You just have to peel it open and spray it. It only takes 2 to 4 minutes to start working. And the person could already be past breathing, and it still works. Now, like an EpiPen can't remove peanuts from the body in allergic reactions, Narcan nasal spray cannot remove opioids from the body either. Everyone assumes it does. It does not. It temporarily removes the opioids off those breathing receptors in the brainstem and lung to reactivate breathing, okay? So now we have a tangible tool. to keep them breathing until paramedics get there. Phenomenal. You know, as I mentioned, it only takes 2 to 4 minutes to start working. It's so valuable. The device is stable. It is stable from -15 to +40, okay? And if it freezes below -15, it's not garbage. It's actually stable, frozen, thawed, until that expiry date. So yes, you can keep it in your car, maybe an unheated job site. We just have to make sure one's warm all the time, okay? That is the manufacturer's recommendations. Now, I can tell you it takes 15 minutes to thaw at room temperature according to the manufacturer, but I can also tell you from street data, from my guys who use it, it takes 10 minutes to thaw in your hand, 5 minutes to thaw in your armpit, things the manufacturer can't say. So I'll say that to you right now. I'll put it forward, take it for what it's worth. Now, some people are afraid to use naloxone. They're like, Mark, I heard when you give naloxone, you make somebody violent. What they're trying to describe there to you is an acute opioid withdrawal syndrome. First of all, if it's an accidental ingestion, there is no tolerance, thus there can't be withdrawal. Now, every single person who is even opioid tolerant will experience withdrawal at some point. But usually it's a while when they're in the care of a paramedic, okay? But every single person will wake up with agitation and anxiety. It's almost guaranteed. But every human who loses consciousness for whatever reason, heart attack, heat stroke, seizures, whatever, will wake up with agitation and anxiety. It is a normal human process. We have to stop demonifying it and only assuming it's withdrawal from the opioid. Actually, it's a normal human response. And it only lasts for 20 to 40 minutes, remember. Narcan nasal spray will not last much longer than that. The literature says an hour, but actually really in reality, it's 20 to 40 minutes with our most strongest or with our street's strongest opioids. It is a medical emergency. We must call 911. Most people actually will spend a couple days at hospital in care or in observation with somebody in the event of an acute opioid overdose. They have to go to hospital. It's a medical emergency. But do not be afraid to use Narcan nasal spray, okay? Why? It's by far the safest thing I can dispense in a day as a pharmacist. It's safer than Advil or Tylenol. It'll have no effect on someone who has not taken an opioid. So even if you don't know if they took a substance at all or what the substance was, maybe the blue lips was a heart attack, maybe the shaking was a seizure. It doesn't matter. If you think it, you give it. That's my new message. If you think it, you give it. If you assume substances, you give it anyway, just in case you're right. Now, despite the new bill, the mandating the occupational health and safety standard, you know, giving naloxone in the event of what you thought was an opiate overdose has been fully endorsed by our Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act since 2016. It does say naloxone. It does say opiate overdose. Check it out. Okay, how do we use this now? What is required to use it? So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to stop my share for a second and bring you guys to a website that I developed called naloxonecare.com. This website was designed to provide low barrier access to people who require naloxone training. It's a 5-minute training video that I developed on a website to show you how to use a Narcan nasal spray in the event of an acute opioid overdose. I'll bring you to that website, show you this video so you have access to a resource for your membership or your employees. Here we go. If you can't hear this in a little bit, please, someone scream at me.
In 2018, 1 Canadian died every 2 hours from an opioid overdose, and this number continues to rise. It's not just heroin or fentanyl users in the streets, it's grandmothers with their own prescriptions, and kids who didn't even know they took an opioid. My name is Mark Barnes. I'm a pharmacist and the owner of naloxonecare.com, an interactive website designed to allow more Canadians access to life-saving drug naloxone. Naloxone is the drug that's found in an easy-to-use Narcan nasal spray. It can reverse the effects of an opiate overdose in as quick as 2 to 3 minutes. After you complete a simple training and answer a few questions on this website, we can send you a Narcan nasal spray kit directly to your home. So what are opioids? They are painkillers such as codeine, morphine, OxyContin, Percocet, and fentanyl. Recently, much stronger powdered fentanyl and carfentanil are leading to accidental use and overdose because they are so small and hard to detect if mixed with other drugs. With this Narcan nasal spray antidote, you can deliver 2 milligrams of naloxone directly to the bloodstream. Although naloxone can reverse the effect of an opioid overdose, it cannot remove the opioids from the body. It's important to call 911 after you administer the spray because in 20 to 40 minutes, the effects of naloxone will wear off and the person will slip back into overdose. The time it takes when an opioid is ingested to overdosing and death can be as quick as 3 to 5 minutes, which is why it's so important to recognize the symptoms quickly. Here are the 4 major symptoms of an overdose. Unconsciousness. The person is not moving and cannot be woken up, even if you shake or pinch them. Pinpoint pupils. The person's pupils are small and hard to detect. Snorting or gurgling sounds. The person can be heard gurgling or choking, and breathing is shallow or undetectable. Blue and gray lips. The person's lips turns blue or gray. Other symptoms include cold, clammy skin, foaming at the mouth, and shaking. Every naloxone kit you order from naloxonecare.com includes a case, latex-free vinyl gloves, a CPR mask, 2 doses of Narcan nasal spray, an identification card letting everyone know that you've been trained to use naloxone, and instructions. We like the 5-step approach to respond to an opiate overdose. Step 1, shake and shout. Assess the person and remember the major symptoms of an overdose. Step 2, call 911. If the person is unresponsive, call 911 right away. Step 3, administer the naloxone. Lay the person on their back. Remove the device from the packaging. There's only 1 dose per device, which is ready to use, so do not test or prime the device. Tilt the person's head back and provide support under their neck with your hand. Gently insert the tip of the nozzle into the nostril. Your fingers should be right up against the nose. If giving to a child, make sure the nozzle seals the nostril. Press the plunger firmly with your thumb to give the dose. Remove the device from the nostril. Step 4, chest compressions. Start CPR as it takes 2 to 3 minutes for naloxone to start working. If you have an AED, use it. If not, push on the center of the chest. This pushes any of the oxygen left in the body to the brain and circulates naloxone to the areas of the brain and lung to start working. Step 5, is it working? If you do not hear a deep breath in 2 to 3 minutes, then go back to step 3 and administer a 2nd dose of Narcan nasal spray found in your kit. Once the naloxone is actively working and the person is breathing on their own, put them in the recovery position. The recovery position helps open the person's airways and avoids choking on vomit or spit. Remember, naloxone only lasts 20 to 40 minutes, so an overdose can return. It's important to get the proper medical treatment. Tell paramedics everything you know about the situation so they can provide the best care. Get trained, get a kit, save a life.
And there you go. That's how to use Narcan nasal spray in the event of an acute opioid overdose. Now, the video itself is a little dated. I'm not going to lie to you. And the reason being is that we study the effectiveness of naloxone, actually mortality, morbidity data. Did you make it? Did you not make it? Right. So I really want people to get naloxone into the body as fast as possible to preserve as much brain function as possible, because I'm seeing the consequences of people who've overdosed and live, yet have permanent medical damage, can maybe never work again. So I want to make sure we get naloxone into the body as fast as possible. So my new 5-step approach is a little bit different. It says step 1, assessment. We want it to be quick. Remember, you think it, you give it. But we're looking for pinpoint pupils, gurgling, blue-gray lips, and shaking. You start to see that stuff, you know probably it's an opioid overdose. And then step 2 is 911. We want someone else to call 911 for you if you're not by yourself. If you're by yourself, use your cell phone, use the speakerphone function of your cell phone. Do not wait for the 911 responder to tell you what to do. Just going to take your naloxone, you're going to peel it open and use it, right? Now, naloxone itself is a single-use device, ready to go. You just have to peel it open and spray it. We know it goes in the nose. This is the plunger. Of course, the new ones that are not demos is actually have a red plunger. You place it in the nose. If you choose the left nostril, you want to twist a little bit towards the outside. Same goes to the right side. And then you spray the middle part, right, to activate it. Now, as you can tell, it's shot about 3.5, 4 feet here in the office. Inside the nose, it's coated the sinus. Single-use device. You've cooked it. See, all the plunger is now empty. All the medicine was stored in this here canister right here, which contained 0.4 mils of naloxone. Now, you deliver naloxone to the sinus, right? But we need to drive it to the brainstem for it to work. How do we get it there? We get it there by using an AED to zap the guy driving naloxone there, or we push on the chest. Chest compressions will also bring the oxygen or bring the naloxone to the area for it to work. And when it kicks in, you'll actually hear a sound that's heard in every reversal. I've used it several times myself. You'll hear this. The deep breath. You do not hear a deep breath in about, 2 or 3 minutes. You know you need more naloxone. So then you grab another spray from your kit and you do it again. So it goes spray, chest compressions, until you know, you hear that deep breath, great. A paramedic takes over, or you run out of naloxone. If you run out of naloxone, you continue on with normal CPR as you've been trained in your CPR training until paramedics arrive. That's how we use a Narcan nasal spray in the event of an acute opioid overdose. Okay, a couple more resources and I'll send you on your way. And I will stop speaking. I just want to share a couple of resources. One of them is this. Okay, so first and foremost is getting naloxone in Ontario. We know where to get them now. As Dr. Mui mentioned earlier, there are community pharmacy programs. There's public health. The community pharmacy program is the easiest to access for most people. The list of pharmacies are on that website right there. If you have a problem in a pharmacy where you're not getting the proper care, I want to know about it. Okay, so email me directly. There's my email. I need to hear about it so we can coach them along. I am one of the naloxone champions for the Minister of Health. I want to make sure everyone's educated. I have developed a guideline with some peers of mine across Canada for the proper provision of naloxone through pharmacies. And of course, as Joel mentioned earlier, the Ontario Naloxone Workplace Program. And my website, of course, is naloxonecare.com. Now, we know that using alone is a big risk factor, as we've seen with 73% of deaths happening to people by themselves. That's why we're thrilled to have access to this service now. It's called the National Overdose Response Service. This is a free national service. The fact that we need it is terrifying, but at least we have to talk about it. If someone's by themselves and they want to use a substance, but they're a little bit afraid to, their risk of overdose may be high, they can actually dial a phone number now and speak to someone live, or download a Brave app on their phone and talk to someone via chat on text while they use that substance by themselves. If they don't respond back, they'll send an EMS to the PIN location of the cell phone. Fantastic free service called NORS. We should all promote it. Of course, the last thing I say before I turn over the questions is ask not why the addiction, but why the pain. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Mark. Just if there's any questions for Mark right now, again, you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat. But I know he'll continue to be available to RESCON and our members if there are any questions between now and June 1st. So I'll turn it over to Andrew, who's going to kick off the panel discussion. And maybe he's having a bit of connectivity issues. So I will kick off the panel discussion. And I'll let Kathy and Daniel introduce themselves briefly and their role in this mental health and addiction space.
Great. This is Kathy Martin speaking. Thank you so much, RESCON, for inviting me to speak with the group. IHSA, for those of you who don't know, is the Infrastructure Health and Safety Association here in Ontario, and we are the prevention health and safety organization servicing the construction sector. So as many of you probably do know, our mandate is around prevention and providing tools and resources around prevention. So that's what I'll be speaking with you today. But just to give you a little context of who I am, I'm their new mental health and wellness specialist. I guess not so new anymore. It's almost 2 years. It feels very new, still at IHSA. But I came from the industry of mental health and working with organizations across Canada around mental health in the workplace. So that is my background. I'm involved in the Standard for Psychological Health and Safety as a technical committee member, and very passionate around addressing addiction issues such as the opioid crisis in a holistic manner and looking at the mental health. So I'm excited for the panel this morning. So thank you again for having me.
My name is Daniel Dos Santos, Director of Health and Safety at Tridel, Ontario. Not as knowledgeable as the rest of the group here, but I'm definitely one of the individuals who are very excited and determined to implement such initiatives that Dr. Moody, Mark, and many others, the group from RESCON as well, who are definitely promoting, Kathy as well with IHSA and many other groups out there. And then we have actually done quite a bit since 2022 in the beginning of the pandemic. We introduced the Naloxone on our projects, and we also provided training to our site management staff, making sure that everyone is aware of what to do when situations occur on construction sites.
I guess I figured out my way back on if everybody can hear me. So Zoom picked a weird time to throw me off, but welcome to Daniel and Kathy, and we did have Melissa Merkers from Menkes, but she got pulled away, I think, with the safety issue. And so I guess that's what happens when you get good speakers. Sometimes they're in demand in their day jobs. But certainly just want to continue on with the discussion based on the excellent presentations from Dr. Moody and Mark, because I think, one, they really framed the issue, but two, they bring passion and they bring real life examples. And I think that's what we're always looking for in construction. And so to follow up with kind of that real life approach, I'm going to look to you first, Kathy. And so you said you're with the IHSA. The IHSA does lots of great things, but one of them is really creating and getting out resources. And so wanted to start with you and just say, you know, what other resources are out there, and kind of what have you seen, because you got your finger on the pulse?
Yeah, you know, when I did start a couple of years ago, this was definitely an issue. We knew through the pandemic, as you heard from the stats and their presenters, that this was a growing issue, and something that the construction really needed to take hold. So in recognizing that, even long before the new legislation was coming out, I was on this looking at opioids and how we can work with our membership in looking at prevention. So what are those root causes? What are the drivers? So that's where I'm really focused in on. And so there's a couple things that we've developed, and I'll go through those more in depth. But one of the main things that we've developed is a short, brief guide for employers. And I think, Andrew, you can certainly share that after with the group. But this brief guide is really just framing the issues, what you've heard today, and providing a lot of links and resources to the employer, and being able to not just look at naloxone and getting naloxone in, but what else can I do? And sort of putting that strategy in place and looking at prevention of some of these opioid harms as well. So that was one of the big pieces that we've done. And then looking at how, like I said, connecting the dots to mental health. And yeah.
Yeah, and I like that. And I think it really builds on what Mark and Joel were saying, where I think opioids or naloxone, that's really the tip of the iceberg, what we can see, but it's really figuring out all these underlying problems that are leading to drug abuse or opioid abuse, and or, you know, it is the intentional part too, where we're not aware, and maybe the word, and I'll look at Mark too, is ensconced as a society, right? We're ensconced by opioids, and it's everywhere. To look to Daniel, and maybe Mark, if you want to jump in on the panel as well, because you have a wealth of knowledge. So Daniel, you guys do great work when it comes to on-site activities. And so I guess the question is, how do you take the resources that are available, but really implement it and get it out onto site, you know, through joint health and safety committees, toolbox talks, is really like, what's your on-site strategy? Because I know you guys have been very successful there.
Yes, we did get a lot of different parties involved in the whole process. I think the first thing was trying to get the resources that were out there, and then try to dissect the information to make sure that everyone understands exactly what the process is and how it benefits the industry as a whole. Right in the beginning, like I said, we made sure that we got it, all the individuals on our construction sites trained, our site management staff, but we also made sure that the Joint Health and Safety Committee were involved in multiple workplaces. We discussed the documentation that we received, we saw from IHSA and also from the naloxonecare.com. We got those points, and we placed it, we discussed in the site meeting with the contractors on site. Having that then open up the opportunity to discuss and to encouraging the other parties to be part of this whole process. And then, of course, we also looked at other ways of getting them involved. When we do, for instance, when we have the overtime permits, we want to make sure that the contractors on site are qualified to perform first aid, CPR, use any other type of permit such as AED, but also the naloxone kits. So we also putting that as part of their contracts. So then when they are on site, they actually can use the product properly, and working together, I think will definitely benefit.
Yeah, no, I really I really appreciate that. And that practical approach, I think, has really paid off and will continue to pay off. I can't tell if Mark's pinned or not, but I know you've really championed that practical, implementable approach. And so just wanted to get your thoughts on it if we could.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the message for me, I mean, I understand workplace, but like, for me, the message, this is about a life skill. I want every kid in high school to have this training. I want them to be able to be, whether it's a 14-year-old kid working at McDonald's or, a 65-year-old person who's been working construction for 35 years. This is a message, it's a life skill. I know that, I believe that, an occupational health and safety standard will actually bring this talk forward to a different group of population. But, this is the same as learning how to swim or CPR right now, until we get a handle on, using opioids as a main tool to battle mental health issues. I think until we get there, we got to make sure we're prepared. We have to first stop the deaths, and then from there, work on the living. And let's work on make them better every day. So this is a life skill. So for me, yes, I'm thrilled that I'm gonna really use the ministry's announcement, the new bill, to really, I guess, put forward my own mandate of naloxone training long before this bill. So for me, it's just a life skill. And really, I think it should be, almost like anybody who receives, you wear hard hat and work boots to work on a high risk site. You understand how to use naloxone. It should be that simple, and it should be taught in high school.
Yeah, and I think you've made the point that some stuff, we bring home from work, and some stuff from home we bring to work.
Yeah.
But when you take that kind of the full spectrum approach and make it a life skill, that really, I think it moves the needle. I think, and I'm going to go to Daniel here. When cannabis became legal, when we've looked at alcohol on site, when we've looked at other issues, we haven't created specific policies for each substance. But what a lot of builders and a lot of employers have done is really look at fit for duty. Mm-hmm. And so how do you fit naloxone into the fit for duty approach? And maybe I'll just, I think that's more than enough of a setup for Daniel, and let him talk.
Yeah, I believe that by getting, we looked at the approach of discussing more thoroughly with our employees, making sure that they understand, giving the contractors the site, understand what is expected. We also made sure that it is part of our site safety rules that they have to show up fit for work. By discussing, by having that documentation, by using the resources, by helping them understand not only what is required, but also the importance of protecting others from discrimination, for instance, and many different other things. By having that discussion with them actually gave us the opportunity to get their feedback on what else could be done. And then I think once everyone works on it, everyone discusses, everyone shares their experiences, we have an opportunity to engage even more other parties, or even act on things that we may be missing, because at the same time, this is something new for us to contribute to a certain degree. It's something new for us to be dealing with. We were always focused on the physical hazards, and not so much when it comes to mental health and the use of substances, either in the workplace or outside of the workplace. So I think that by discussing, by getting, participating in conversations or learning from experienced people like Mark and so forth, I think that gives us an opportunity to embrace, if you want, this discussion and be more effective in how we deal with problems.
I think that's excellent. And I'm looking at Kathy. So Kathy, you work with the IHSA. They do great work for everybody, but especially for what I'll say small employers. So a small employer might be looking or watching this webinar and saying, okay, not only do I need to figure out naloxone by June 1st, I've got to start figuring out fit for duty, and I've got to figure out a holistic health and safety approach. To that small employer that's sitting here, probably overwhelmed, what can they expect from IHSA, or what do you say to that small employer that, the light just turned on and now they need to go full tilt when it comes to safety?
Yeah, so there's a couple things I would say to that, Andrew. I think first is to piggyback on Mark's comment. We've got to save lives first. So naloxone may seem like a downstream approach for some folks who are in the occupational health and safety sphere, but it's a critical thing to get into workplaces. So that is a simple thing to do. You know, you can visit any one of the resources that we've shared today. It could be the St. John's, the Red Cross, could be Mark's. IHSA also has a new free naloxone training as well. Just get yourselves trained. I think so. If you're in a small employer, start with yourself. Learn what the issues are, take the training, get naloxone on site at a minimum. And then IHSA has developed an employer tool guide, which is really walking through the basic concepts of how to manage a lot of these issues in that holistic approach. And I always, when I talk to folks, I always say, don't play whack-a-mole. So right now we're talking about naloxone specifically, and we're talking about the opioid crisis. But what employers need to do, especially small businesses, is really managing risk to workers' well-being. So that could be physical, that could be mental, that could be social. And so, you know, how do we reframe that? You know, there's a total worker health model that you can even look at, which will help guide you. And so all of this stuff I pulled together in a very simple, free to use online employer tool guide at IHSA. So definitely have a look at that. But start small and, you know, start downstream, because that's where we're at. Unfortunately, we're about trying to save lives. And through that conversation with your small employer, if you're a small employer, that's where the change is going to happen. And I'm a big believer in shifting the culture and shifting the stigma through conversations. So IHSA also built a facilitator guide on how to have safety talks around mental health and opioids. And I think it's really important that we all learn to challenge ourselves, learn to challenge our own stigma, our own bias, first and foremost, and then take that information and knowledge out to others. So I know that was kind of a long-winded way, but, you know, start with the basics, get that naloxone in and educate yourself, bust your own stigma, and then get out there.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't say enough about joint health and safety committees. And so if you're a small employer, maybe you don't have your own, but maybe you're on a site that's big enough to have one. And so I have to give credit to Craig LeSurf out of the League of Champions. He defines R&D as rip off and duplicate. And when it comes to safety, that's a great approach. The only thing I'll say representing employers is make it your own as well, right? Yep. So use someone else's template, but then customize it for your workplace. You also said it, Kathy, you can't talk about naloxone without talking about mental health. So I'm going to go back to Mark because he's got a lot of passion here as well, but I'll give everybody a chance to talk here. So as you said it, Mark, we probably had some fairly significant mental health issues in construction before COVID. RESCON has done 4 symposiums on it. I think we've gotten past the point of scratching the surface, but certainly we don't have all of the answers. You talked about it in your presentation. COVID certainly didn't make mental health better, right? And so opioids, and maybe I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to you. I don't need to guide the conversation because I know you got a lot of passion here, but just talk to us about mental health. And if you get a naloxone kit on site, it creates the opportunity for conversations. And so how do employers take advantage of that opportunity?
It actually presents itself as soon as you start talking about it. So we often use naloxone as a tangible tool, right? So you're providing a tool. Everyone in the industry love tools. I mean, it's how they get this, that's how they do the trade. So to me, this is a mental health tool, right? So we use naloxone as a gateway conversation. We call it the gateway conversation, where you can actually give someone a tangible tool, and by empowering them to be a lifesaver, you're not talking about their own mental health, but yet you're performing a platform that we can talk about mental health in general. When you speak to someone about how their own feeling, as an industry, unfortunately, that is predominantly male, we shut down. We don't want to talk about our mental health because we feel it's a character flaw. We feel that we're deemed weak, not just physically, but mentally. And that, we're supposed to be, tough and be able to work and strong and to be able to do physical labor. When a lot of the cases, COVID has taught us that, we're not invincible. We all do struggle at times. and it's okay to talk about it. I think with the new generation coming up, I think we'll see a difference. But for the guys who are working in the industry now, we've got to change that perception. So how we do that is through naloxone. It's a gateway conversation. It's a tangible tool you're providing someone saying, hey, you could save someone else's life, and here's why you should. Because they're actually using opioids to kill mental pain, not just physical pain. It starts as physical pain, but trust me, they're trying to turn off their brain for something else they've been through in their life. And guess what? You couldn't walk a day in their shoes. Trust me. You know, when you have those little simple conversations and use it as the gateway conversation, you can even put it in your little safety talk, your safety break, your tailgate talk that says naloxone, the gateway conversation. And it's a really good start. And it's a tangible tool. You're putting the onus on a device that leads to an open conversation.
Yeah, it's about taking the opportunity when you do something like this. I think that's great. And then I got to go back to Daniel, because you're the one that's implementing it on site. So what are your tips for implementing and having mental health conversations, raising awareness? What's Tridel's secret?
I would say that, like, Mark was spot on. Like, naloxone definitely was a gateway opportunity to start the conversation. Of course, a lot during COVID, a lot of discussions started in regards to that. But then I think some of the things that we can do is use the material, the resources available. Have that information available to workers either in a printed form or using a safety platform. For instance, we have a safety platform. We have all the resources put in one specific section. We broke it down by two. We have physical hazards and we have mental health discussions. We have pretty much all the resources from IHSA related to mental health and all the other associations we put into it. We also created this, what we're calling, which we are launching actually on Friday. We're doing this wellness blueprint, trail blueprint information, where we're discussing the employee assistance program, showing the individuals, our employees, how to access this platform, how to access, how to contact someone if they need help. Of course, highlighting the fact that if the crisis is extremely concerning, call 911 if required. And then also showing them how to start conversations. I think like what Mark said before, when it comes to safety talks, start with the safety talks. Naloxone is an opportunity for us to initiate that process. Perhaps sit down, have coffee, have donuts, discuss this a little bit further, make the environment a little bit more comfortable, and then you will see that people will participate. The industry is known as a macho industry. Like, we don't want to talk about it, let's go keep going. But actually, when we see, especially the last few years, even the older generation are more open to discuss, and they actually wanting to be knowledgeable about this topic, so they can talk to their junior staff as well and understand how to help them, how to give them guidance. And I think that by using these types of approaches will definitely help individuals, not only as like a instructor, but I think that as employers, we can also follow similar procedures, and we'll see the results. And it may not work for everyone, but then as you go, you learn how to navigate through this process and see how it fits your company culture, and then add a few things here and there, and then discuss with other individuals and learn from each other.
Yeah, and I'll go to Kathy too, because I know you sit on a couple mental health committees and certainly have done a lot of work with Dr. Moody, and he's relied on your expertise. So just turn it over to you to speak about mental health.
Yeah, you're just listening to the conversation, and one thing that just kind of resonates with me is the starting of the conversation. I think that's really important. But one thing I want to sort of, I guess, take a step back and mention is to have that conversation is difficult for multiple reasons. And from the employer's perspective, it's really their job to work to try to create a culture of support. And that takes time and effort, and also takes a multi-layered approach sometimes too. It's not a one and done. It's not like, let's bring Mark in and have a kick-ass, conversation around naloxone once, and that's the end of the conversation. It's like, we need to build a strategy as employers, as workplaces, to start building that culture of support. And that sometimes is addressing the systemic issues too, right? What are some of the systemic barriers? Like, what are our policies? With our, let's say, our substance use policy or fit for work policy, is it a catch and release policy? Like, are we looking to catch people and fire them? Are we really looking to support people? And how do our policies translate and give that knowledge out to the workers? So like, do they feel supported by the workplace as well? So it's not just support amongst each other and support to talk about it, but how is the workplace supporting? And I think that's a really important piece. And then how are we getting upstream and preventing some of these issues in the first place? So Mark, in your presentation, you talked about very few, like 1 in 6 actually seeking help for these issues. So that is a real concern, and we have to look at that. What are those barriers, and start tackling some of those barriers. Again, it's around some of those social norms, those outdated social norms of what it is to be a male in our society, right? Challenging some of that, challenging the norm of having 12-hour shifts, 12 days straight. I mean, we're setting people up for failure in some ways in our industry. So how do we not just examine the individual at the individual level, what we can do to support them, but how can we change the industry to be more of a culture of support around these issues, and not, mental health, addictions. Yeah.
I think, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I just think it's really, the culture shift is huge. I can't understate that we have a lot of work to shift the culture. And then once we can do that and build that sense of safety, then people will hopefully reach out within the workplace. But in the meantime, it's about supporting individuals too to get the help that they need.
Absolutely. Okay. And so what I'm going to do, and I'll go to you first, Daniel, is we're going to kind of move towards kind of closing. So what is one thing that you want to leave everybody with? Like, what is one takeaway that you want to leave everybody with? Start with Daniel.
I think thinking back about what Dr. Moody said, that one death is way too many. I think that if we also think the same, if we follow that pattern, we can also think that one person struggling with mental health or struggling with opioid use and so forth is way too many. So if we keep that in mind, if we work towards minimizing the number of cases in Ontario or in our country, I think that we're doing it right. So we have to keep focused on improving and getting the help that people need, and providing the support and resources necessary for people to actually get the help and the support that they need.
And I'll go to Kathy next.
Well, if I have one thing to say, I think similar to what Mark is saying, until we can shift the culture and have safer conversations in the workplace, I think we have to get the message out, carry naloxone. Everyone should carry naloxone. Everyone should have it in their home. You are a lifesaver. And I can say that as someone who has used it on many occasions with family members. So it is get that in your houses. And I think as workplaces, until we can shift the culture, we need to get the message out, don't use alone, and give those supports like the Brave app out there, so that people know if they are going to use alone, to at least do it safe as possible. And I think those, if that's what we can do, don't use alone and carry naloxone.
Yeah, no, I think that's a powerful message. And I'll go to Mark. Maybe Kathy stole yours.
A little bit, but I guess my bigger message is actually, from seeing people from ground level for the last decade, don't ask them to leave your job and you're done.
Yeah.
Stop judging, start caring.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And so this has been a great panel, and I really appreciate the three of you taking the time. Thank you, Mark, for your presentation. With all our webinars, we do make a donation afterwards. And so we're going to reach out to Mark, and the charity of his choice, we're going to make a donation as a thank you to all the speakers. And then I'm going to check with Amina, because I did get disconnected. Is there anything we need to do before we do closing remarks?
No, there was a quick question that I forgot to from the audience for Mark, and it was would the current treatment of naloxone work for the new, and I don't know, I'm gonna butcher the name of this
Xylazine.
drug.
That
Yeah.
is- yeah.
So xylazine is actually an alpha blocker, so it's not a opioid. So naloxone only works on opioid receptors, the mu receptor. So xylazine is not, it's an alpha receptor. So it's used as kind of anesthetic sedatives for veterinary medicine. Its effect in animals is about 4 hours. Its effect in humans, we have no idea. A long time, based on what I'm hearing. So it leads to complicated overdoses. So what happens is actually a person goes down with a complicated overdose, which means more than one substance. Naloxone can certainly help with breathing because you remove the opioid, but we can't do anything for the benzos, right? You can't do anything for the xylazine or high dose sleeping pills. So you have to support the airway for a long time, which could mean intubation, could mean ventilation. So at Safe Consumption Services, where the mortality rate is still 0, folks, remember that. They support the airway, but it's an expensive process because it lasts for hours. So, basically you've prevented an overdose from an opioid with naloxone, but you can do nothing for the xylazine. This is why the message is simple. You go high and hard with naloxone, you definitely call 911 and you have to support that airway. So does that mean now that we start to think about more advanced CPR training with bag valves and masks? Potentially, right? So this is where the trend is going, unfortunately. I don't want to get into that today, but so no, the answer is no. It does not work for anything but opioids. And if it's a complicated overdose, which is more likely the case with street supply today, 911 must be called, support that airway until they get there.
Perfect. Okay, with that, I think we can move to closing remarks. Amina, are we okay?
Yes. Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, well, whenever Mark comes on, I always learn a lot, but also when Kathy and Daniel come on, I learn a lot too. So just thank you to the speakers, including Dr. Joel Moody. Thank you to Amina and Ahid, who obviously do all the support and get these things going. So thank you to them. So today is just another step forward in the RESCON health and safety approach. And so I've also got to recognize the Health and Safety Committee because they're the ones that are doing the real work every day. And influence and direct the work that we do at RESCON. As was said today, whether it's naloxone, whether it's mental health, whether it's any issue, health and safety is all encompassing and all connected. When you see somebody overdose or when you talk about naloxone, you're really just talking about the tip of the iceberg. This all gets into physical safety. It gets into how people, receive safety orientation and safety training, but also other training. Are we onboarding people on site? Are we spending time in the recruitment process outlining what it is to work on construction site? What are we focusing on when it comes on to retention? We've had 4 mental health symposiums, but mental health issues have been around a lot longer than 4 years. There's been incredible investments by this government in the last 5 to 10 years. But we're still in the early stages, and listening to Mark there, yeah, we're doing great work, and there's a great standard coming out June 1st. So everyone is obviously going to have naloxone kits on site, and training is going to be provided by June 1st. I know a lot of RESCON members have already done that. A lot of RESCON members already have the kits on site and have already done the training. We've got to communicate this with our trades. I'm going to borrow a lot from what Mark said in these closing remarks, but this is not just a work issue, and this is a great example of how home issues are coming to work. And so we have a duty to keep people safe. I believe that RESCON members also just want to keep people safe. They want to keep the public safe. They want to keep people safe at work and at home. I am always blown away by the approach to safety of RESCON members and the duty and the investments they make in the communities that they build. And so this fits. RESCON health and safety, did great work before COVID, but we really stepped up our game during COVID, and we've continued to really implement that continuous improvement model afterwards. And so we're going to continue to address the big issues of the day, including things like naloxone. I will plug, there is a crane safety event in partnership with the Ontario Formwork Association. That's up for May 31st. We put it out in every newsletter. If you want to join and you haven't joined yet, please send Amina or me an email. But just a big thank you to all the safety experts that spoke today, but also the RESCON Health and Safety Committee. And so we will get the resources out that were mentioned today. A recording will be available. And thank you everyone for your time.